Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on a weekend and for your care and interest in democracy and the rule of law. I'm Caitlin Sanford, the co-president of Climate Action Rhode Island. Climate Action Rhode Island, here Carrie, we are a grassroots group of Rhode Islanders concerned about the climate crisis and looking for practical solutions. So we work at the local, state, and national level on politics. We have a very active group looking to combat misinformation about offshore wind and support the industry here to bring clean energy and great jobs and affordable pricing to our state. And we lately are joining in a lot of protests, a lot of resistance, being in solidarity and coalitions with a number of organizations like our friends at Indivisible Rhode Island and Aseem.
Thank you, Kate. So my name is Aseem, like the thing that holds your shirt together. I am the chair of Indivisible Rhode Island, and like Climate Action Rhode Island, we are a grassroots group with a national base that works towards the resistance against the Trump administration and kind of the unlawful things that we're obviously going to talk about today, and getting involved with progressive policy and progressive candidates, specifically for us, obviously, in the state of Rhode Island, both at the local, state, and federal level. And so, just a little bit of background, this event has been, I think, almost 3 months in the making, and I'm actually very glad. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready today. I'm very glad we're having this in May, as opposed to the original time when we were thinking about having it in March, because things have changed drastically in the last 2 months, and so we are going to get an inside look today into how things are going from a litigation standpoint, and meeting one of the, if not the most passionate progressive leaders in our state. Somebody who needs no introduction, so we're not going to give him one, we're going to let him do it himself. Our Attorney General, Peter Neronha.
Wonderful. So thanks so much for being here, AG Neronha. We would love to hear, I think you represent Rhode Island's grit, heart, hustle, Jamestown's own. So we'd love to hear from your own words. You get a lot of bios, but what in your story do you want to share with the audience, and what led you to getting interested in law, pursuing this career, and fighting for Rhode Islanders?
All right, so family story, my mother's an immigrant from Germany. My dad raised in Rhode Island, born in Jamestown in 1929. They're both still alive, God bless them. My dad's a Korean War veteran. I was raised in a family that valued education. Neither one of my parents went to college. I did, and as did my brother and sister. And I went to Boston College after going to North Kingston High School and to Jamestown Elementary School, which I loved, and where my boys went. After a BC undergrad, I went to law school. I had student loan debts like a lot of people did then and now, and I got a job at a large Boston law firm that helped me pay those loans off. I met my wife in an emergency room, which is a whole nother story. She was a resident, and later we dated and we got married. Moved to Jamestown. She's a primary care doctor, raised our boys. They both went to Brown. They're now off in the world doing their thing. And professionally, when I came home, I really wanted to get in a courtroom. I've never loved the law. I'm not one of those, it sounds weird for a lawyer, but one of those purists that will pick up a Supreme Court decision and just read it because it's interesting. I'd rather read a novel or history. It's just not, it's not how I value the law. I value the law as a means of doing something, or whether it's an issue, or in that case, I just wanted to be in a courtroom and try cases. I thought that would be fun, to speak to juries and make arguments. And I did that as a state prosecutor. I became a federal prosecutor in 2002. President Obama appointed me as the U.S. Attorney in 2009. And really, in that job, really loved, again, using the law to challenge the issues, take on the issues of the time. One was public corruption, another was environmental enforcement. We had a big case against the state for not cleaning catch basins, which may seem like a small thing, was really polluting the bay and lots of other waterways. And then when President Trump fired me, one of 45 that we're all proud to be fired by the president as U.S. attorneys. You have a T-shirt. It was March 10th of 2017, and decided at that point to try to stay in public service. Ran for Attorney General, and then as Attorney General, have really tried to. There's a prosecutorial element of it, which is a whole separate thing, and I think the way many Rhode Islanders think about the office. But I was interested in being truly the people's lawyer, and that meant building an office, part of an office, which really didn't exist, that would do energy and environmental enforcement and healthcare in a way that would save healthcare and not hurt it. And there are lots of examples of how we had done that, frankly. St. Joe's Hospital comes to mind. Civil rights, consumer protection. Some of that required getting the law changed, which we did. So we've tried to be active in all of that. And then along the way, the quality of the lawyering has really gone up, particularly in that Public Protection Bureau, which is what we call that group. Some of them are here today. Some of them are hopefully getting some rest. Some of them are probably working. But that group of lawyers was very well positioned to take on Trump. They not only had the same worldview that I did, but they were capable of it in a way that the team, frankly, wasn't capable of it when I first was sworn in. And so we've been very fortunate in Rhode Island. I know we're going to talk about it, so I won't go any farther than what I'm about to say. But I think Rhode Island has been involved in, 17 cases. There are 19 overall. And someone will ask me the trivia question, what are the two and why not? And we'll answer that when the time comes. But I'm really proud of the 17 that we've been a part of, the 19 overall. 6 of them have been filed in Rhode Island. And that's a tribute to our team to be able to do that. Because even though we've had co-leads in those states with some great fellow attorneys general, and we should talk about how we have merged our offices effectively at the staff level. The judges look to us and to me here in Rhode Island when they have a question or when they've got a concern. It's my name on the paperwork. We're the lawyers they know. So I'm really proud that we filed them here. We've had near universal success. We've had success in every case in Rhode Island. We've got an injunction. We haven't been denied one. We're still waiting for a couple. But we have effectively stopped the worst of the administration's attempts when it comes to the states and things that are affected through the state. I'm sure we'll talk about how individuals are harmed, particularly in immigration, and the limitations that we have as a practical matter there, although we'll certainly share the concerns. But that's the journey as quickly as I can put it, and I hope that helped.
No, that's fantastic. Does this microphone work now? We're good? Okay. So I kind of want to go back to January-ish or even before that when, Trump had won. And I know I saw a clip, and I'm sure folks in the audience saw it, of Letitia James talking about how the Democratic AGs had been getting together prior to the swearing in and having been prepared for what was going to come. Right? They published their playbook. We all know that, Project 2025 exists. So you had a leg up as the Democratic AGs. Can you talk a little bit about that process of getting together with all the other Democratic AGs prior to the swearing in and then prior to all of this coming down the line?
Yeah, so the origin of that story is, we meet, the Democratic AGs meet, 5-6 times a year. I did not attend a lot of those in my first term, mostly because I felt like I needed to focus on the office to get it to where I thought it should be. But in my second term, once we kind of got to that place where we were kind of humming, I decided I wanted to be a better teammate. So we meet, and so I go more often now. I don't hit them all, but I get to most of them. And so I can't tell you exactly where we were meeting, but I know what time of year it was, because they all blend together. They're a hotel ballroom somewhere. You fly in, you have your meetings, you leave. It's like they're all the same. But it was somewhere, and I remember there were 3 or 4 of us that really wanted to get together, just us, the AGs, in the conference room. So we went into that conference room, and my colleagues from Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada were very concerned that we, the Democratic Party, might not win the election. Obviously, we were hoping, at that time, President Biden was still the candidate, we were hoping we would win, but those concerns really got the attention of those of us who live in real, solid blue states like Rhode Island, where you think, the country can't possibly put Donald Trump in again. Like, can't be that stupid, frankly. Really got our attention. And so what we agreed to do in that moment was, okay, we're going to build the biggest and best law firm in the country. And we didn't do that the first time around. The first time around, New York did their thing, and California did their thing, and Washington State, which has always been very active in this space, did their thing. And while we had success, places like Rhode Island, I remember we were halfway into Trump when I got sworn in 2019. You got 3 hours, you got to sign up to, New York's lawsuit. I don't even understand the lawsuit. I feel like I have a responsibility to read the complaint and understand it so I can explain what it is we're doing and why. I have no doubt if they're doing it, it's righteous, but I got to be able to explain it. I have that responsibility as the lead lawyer for the state of Rhode Island. Now we decided, we're going to merge our staff. So what does that look like? Well, I assigned 3-4 people from that Public Protection Bureau to be my points of contact. One is here, Keith Hoffman, terrific lawyer, comes to us from the University of Pennsylvania and Fordham Law School, right, Keith? Started a little bit before I did, ran our civil rights group for a time, put together our lead paint project. Now is my chief of policy. He's sort of my coordinator, but he was one of 4 that I put into this pool. All of my colleagues did the same, and they started talking daily. And not only were they talking, they identified, it's going to sound weird, 51. Why 51? I don't know. I guess that's where they ended, that's where it landed. But from a larger group of issues that we could all see, right, from listening to Trump and Project 2025 and what he'd done the first time or tried to do, they came up with 51 issues that we felt were going to be immediate challenges, and we could get ahead of them by doing the research on those issues and having that research effectively in the can so that we could pull it off the shelf and use it when the time came and not have to keep up, not be challenged keeping up. And so they started talking on a daily or near daily basis. We met a couple of times. I remember one meeting in Washington where we talked through some of these issues. But as we came closer to the election, the AG started speaking more frequently. And after the president was elected, and we now knew this was going to be a reality, we started speaking every day or near every day. Once he was sworn in, we did speak every day by Zoom. And now we continue to speak every 3 days, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And our staffs are still talking every day. I get an update from my staff at 3 p.m. every day. It's called the Project for Federal Accountability. We didn't know what to call it at first. We didn't want it to be obvious that we were signaling we were worried about Trump coming back, because that's obviously not good for the electorate, that we're concerned. So that's what we called it. We stuck with that. But I get my updates at 3 o'clock. I go into that 4 o'clock Zoom with my colleagues. We talk about where we are in the cases, where we're going, who's working on what, when we're going to file, and then where we're going to file. And those are things that we talk about. As I said, I'll have one tomorrow at 4. And we have built an integrated law firm. And so when we're arguing these cases in Rhode Island, there will be lawyers from California here, depending on the case, Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey. I'm really proud that we have in those cases. One of them we have been the lead, the museums, libraries, and federal mediation services for labor disputes, and then minority businesses. But in every one of those, we've been a true team, and it has been extraordinary to see, particularly the staff work. Staff, they are working really, really, really hard, because we have been moving very, very quickly.
Well, that's fantastic. Give it up for the staff. led with that question because I think a lot of times folks hear Attorney General and they're like, oh yeah, he's the top lawyer in the state, works for us, but we don't really know what happens behind the scenes. So thank you for that insight. So I think there's a question that's on a lot of folks' minds. So this was also submitted, so we do have some questions from folks who submitted them when they got tickets. It's a very simple question with probably a more complex answer than yes or no. Are we in a constitutional crisis? And if so, what are the prospects for ending it?
Yeah.
Starting off with a softball, right?
Well, I don't think we're there yet. That's not to say I'm not alarmed, that we shouldn't be alarmed. And the reason I say we're not there yet is because the courts are holding, for the most part, at least right now. So the district courts are getting it. We're right on the law. When I was U.S. attorney, and as an AUSA, I mean, we really felt like when we went to court, we were arguing the right side of the law, that we had done our research and we were right. It doesn't mean we were always right, for certain. But that's how we looked at it. It's a little different from representing a client, both the state as a client and as an individual. But I feel that way about this. Like, birthright citizenship to me is not a hard question. In fact, it's a pretty easy one. And I think the Supreme Court eventually, when the merits get to the Supreme Court, will do the right thing. We could talk about this injunction thing, because that could be a little wonky, but it's really, when you get to it, pretty simple. But I won't go there just yet, because we're talking about constitutional crisis, and I want to stay focused. I tend to riff, by the way, so you guys need to rein me in. So as long as the district courts hold and do the right thing, which they're doing, and what I see is sort of this passive aggressive behavior by the administration. It's sort of like, well, we can't really do that. We can't really bring the fellow home from El Salvador because, once he left, we don't have the ability to influence the government, which of course is ridiculous. And the judge, you can see the judge's temperature there, down there, rising. In Rhode Island, it has been mostly funding cases, both conditional funding, which I think is extraordinarily dangerous about immigration and law enforcement, and hasn't quite gotten the level of attention from the press, except perhaps from my friend Mr. Alquist here. And I don't mean to call you my friend, because that may be a bad thing. So my respected member of the press here. But I'm sure we'll get to that. But as long as the district courts hold and the administration complies with the orders, we have to keep going back. We've gone back at least twice on the big main funding case we filed here. It's little, it's got a lot. When we turn funding back on, it's not one big spigot. It's a lot of spigots, right? And so they'll turn on 98% of them, but not turn on a couple others and hope we don't notice. Well, we notice. And it's really great to get public input, because I've done a lot of town halls, and we'll say, we got the money turned back on, and someone will say, well, not for this, and then that's how we get back into court, because we need a declaration to explain it. So where will we hit crisis, in my mind? We'll hit crisis when the Supreme Court orders the president to do something, and he ignores it. And that's when we'll be in an extraordinarily difficult place.
Doesn't that happen?
With the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court has ordered the president to do something and he has ignored it, that has not, in my judgment, happened. Certainly not in our case. The facilitation of the gentleman in El Salvador. Well, that issue has not yet, I believe, they sent it back to the district court. It may come back to the Supreme Court, but they sent it back to the district court to wrestle with that question, which is what the district court is doing. So it may come back to the Supremes. But when I'm talking about birthright citizenship, where the president were to say, where the Supreme Court were to say, regardless of what they say about the injunction, I think they'll get that right too. But when birthright citizenship gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court holds that a child born anywhere in the United States, no matter the circumstances, is a citizen, and then the administration refuses to recognize it. That may get there first, there may be others. That's the true constitutional crisis when we get to that point. Because since Marbury versus Madison in 1803, where Judge John Marshall said, we, the Supreme Court, are the final arbiter of what the Constitution says, with the exception of Andrew Jackson. Presidents and the rest of us have followed it. And look, nobody in this room loves Dobbs, I suspect. Nobody in this room loves Bruen, I suspect. We didn't love, for those of us who are old enough, Bush v. Gore, but we accepted it. And I think that's when we hit true constitutional crisis, when there is a direct confrontation between the president and the courts. And look, the president was going off on Friday. I was doing a lot of events in Boston, including speaking to New Englanders, and so I haven't yet had a chance to catch up on everything he says. I don't follow him on social media, but he was clearly going a little bit off the rails. And so you can kind of see where that will eventually happen, but I don't view us as being in that true state of crisis now, where the reaction is, look, we have exhausted the courts, which is how we're fighting back. Really, the only way that really anyone has been able to fight back so far is through the courts. Congress has been sidelined. So when we reach the end of that, then the question becomes, and protest doesn't work, how do we react in a way that the president gets the message? I think that's a scary moment in our democracy. There's plenty right now. Don't get me wrong. We're facing them now. And I see them up close, as you do. But that's the one that where I don't have answers as to what to do with that. Sure.
Yeah, thanks for that. Let's turn to energy and environmental law. So to review where we are, in these first 100 and something days, we've had numerous executive orders, a national energy emergency based on lack of evidence,
right.
Freezing of federal funds from the congressionally appropriated Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, these rollbacks without processes from the EPA, on and on. I know we've been up to speed on that. And we've had some gains with the decision here in Rhode Island, getting back some of the funding from for our nonprofits, including environmental nonprofits. But I know our members are concerned about what we can do. We have Marcia Robbins from Coventry saying, I'm very concerned about lower standards for water, air, national parks. Is enough being done? So we'd love for you to weigh in on that, and with states becoming the key battleground for environmental enforcement and innovation, how is your office preparing for that?
Yeah, look, I think we were not doing enough before Trump took office. One of the things that our energy and environmental unit has been trying to do is to push the McKee administration to move faster and not go backwards. And when I say not go backwards, the master transit plan, and my staff is much more steeped in this than I, frankly, but the master transit plan includes the expansion of river, right? We've got to get people out of cars. We know what is causing greenhouse gases. It's not a surprise to any home heating and transportation, but we're moving backwards on RIPTA, for example. When President Biden was still president and there were funds available, we put in for highway construction. And it was greenhouse gas reduction funding. We put in for the expansion. The Department of Transportation put in for additional highway construction funds, which is frankly ludicrous, right? And so we pushed back really strongly there. But again, sometimes I have to say, the heart of the question, I said this to Kim Kalunian when I did a live shoot there, we had filed 2 cases last week involving, Washington Bridge money or state troopers as immigration officers. It's kind of a big deal. How we solve that issue, right? But the news doesn't cover it and leads with car crashes and fires. Climate, I don't know if you guys have the same view on it, but it's really hard to get mainstream media to cover it consistently. Boston, Massachusetts did it about 18 months ago, unbelievably, I thought great thing. The government gave themselves an environmental scorecard. And it was pretty candid. We're doing well here, we're not doing so well here. I just feel like we're not doing enough in Rhode Island to hit those Act on Climate goals. If you remember, the governor wouldn't sign the legislation until I get him a letter, reassuring him about litigation. Well, if I knew then what I knew now, maybe I would have had a few more conditions in my letter, like make sure your agencies are doing what they're supposed to do, because frankly, they're not. There's not enough urgency around that. And look, we see it elsewhere in healthcare and beyond. So there's that. Even if Kamala Harris were the president today, I don't think Rhode Island would be doing enough. We know we have to get more heat pumps into homes. I don't know what the plan is for that. The money that we drive to these critical issues through the state is enough so that some people think we're doing something when in truth we're not. And that's another good example of that. Like Maine hit its goals. Like, it's colder in Maine, right? I think we can all agree on that. I swore in a young prosecutor the other day who's from Maine. Her name is Emily. And I said, well, how long do you think you stay in Rhode Island? She said, until retirement. Now, this is somebody who's 26. And I asked her, well, why? Because it's really cold up there. Well, they're able to get their heat pumps. They hit their goal, they keep going. Rhode Island, I don't know that we even know what our goal is, let alone are we hitting it. So, we give ourselves pats on the back for being first in plug-in infrastructure, right? But we got a really small state. How hard is it to put in 5, 6 EV things at the rest stops? I mean, that's the problem, right? That we're small, but we don't say because we're small, we're going to do better than everybody else. We're going to do just enough so that the U.S. News and World Report will give us some kind of symbolic pat on the head. So I was really worried even before Trump. Well, now we see where we're going with Trump, that wind is the problem, not the solution. And so we have a case in Boston involving wind. Although I'll be honest, and candid with you, as I intend to be, industry was not the best ally in that fight, which is frankly something that surprised me. You would think that Orsted et al. Would be go, 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 go. And I don't know what drives that. I don't know if what drives that is a sense that you can work with the administration. I refute that. I reject that. I don't think Trump can be reasoned with. I don't think he can be negotiated with. His idea of a deal is a deal that's one-sided. And I look at these cases through that lens. So yeah, I'm really worried about it. There's more cases. There will be more cases to come. And so we're prepared, but we're also being strategic. So dismantling of HHS, when I read that complaint, it took a long time to read it. Although all of our stuff's on our website, so you want to read about what we're doing on our website, it's all there, and in all of its glory. It's a lot of stuff, but if you want to read it, it's all there. But you take HHS, it's not just the CDC. It's a lot more than the CDC. There are agencies out there, even I, as a former federal employee, had never heard of. These conditional funding cases, we've got to get on the books because we're going to start losing our highway funding, our disaster relief funding, unless we get them going. There will be more environmental cases to come. We brought a case for dismantling of the Department of Education. We brought cases over DEI. The list is long, and I know the audience here is largely familiar with it, but I anticipate as, the National Park Service gets dismantled. I know the number of workers has already been slashed. But HHS, for example, it was 20% had effectively been laid off by the time of the lawsuit in this enormous, broad organization. So there's more to come there for sure.
Good, glad to hear that. On the wind case, because we get asked about that and we have a big wind effort. So where does that stand and what do you see the prospects, as you mentioned, maybe industry being cautious there? So it's filed in Boston.
Yep.
What do you see as the short and long-term prospects for the industry here in Rhode Island, knowing that it has the potential to give us good jobs, good union jobs, and
Look, I think like all of the cases we bring, I think that one the prospects are good. And if we can get the kind of preliminary injunction we're looking for, and that that usually takes weeks, it doesn't take months. What we're really talking about there is reversing the Trump administration's characterization of wind as a problem and as fossil fuels as a solution. and holding the administration to what it's already obligated itself to do. And that issue is what the federal government's already obligated itself to do. And that's really the issue on most, if not all, the cases that involve money that we've brought to date. It's the Congress has allocated this money. They've made a decision. You as the president can't take it away. And that goes to the very heart of our government, right? Because there are three branches. Congress is one, sidelining the Congress, you're taking authority for yourself.
So keeping in that same vein, so we've talked a lot about how there are these 17 out of 19 lawsuits that Rhode Island is involved in. And I'd love if you could give us some insight into, you don't have to go through all 17, but sort of the highlights of why we've brought, or why your office has brought certain action, who's involved in that action, and then where those cases stand right now.
Yeah, so the two that we're not involved in, because I know some of you are wondering, one would involve funding where we had already used all of our funds. Keith, do you remember what kind of funding that was?
Education.
Education. We'd already used the funds. So we've got to show three things: harm, violation of the law, standing. Standing means that Rhode Island, the state, the collective, you, have been harmed as a group. When we've spent all the money that they're trying to take back, we obviously don't have standing, so we're not in that one. And the other one was tariffs. And I went back and forth on tariffs. We again had a hard time identifying for Rhode Island how tariffs would impact us as a state. So for example, New York, Vermont, get a lot of energy from Canada, pretty easy to show there. The most we could come up with from our state agencies was URI thought they might have a 3 to 4% increase in supplies. So we didn't feel like we had enough that we could really make that argument with a straight face from here. And since we had 17 colleagues who were doing it, that they could carry it. So those are the two we're not in. The ones that were in here involve mostly, the first four involve mostly funding. And one is the big OMB case, which was filed really early on. I think probably the one right after birthright citizenship, certainly the one that was on our radar the most. That would have cut off everything, all federal funding, at least for a time in Rhode Island, including Medicaid. So, 1/3 of our population, maybe a little bit more, would not have had access to health care. I mean, the state literally couldn't draw it down. Now, the administration said afterward, well, it never would have impacted health care. But it did, because when we tried to draw down our Medicaid funds, we couldn't draw them down. And the answer from our federal counterparts was, and we had a declaration for this, an affidavit in our lawsuit, was it's under review, we can't tell you how long, we can't tell you why, we're not putting anything in writing. And as someone who prosecuted a lot of corrupt politicians over the course of my career, whenever someone says they won't put it in writing, that's a bad sign. That's a bad sign. So that's a great case, I think, good example of how, huge case, but how quickly we're able to act. That came out by an OMB, Office of Management Budget memo. That's why we call it the OMB case. 5, 6 o'clock at night. We talked that night, AG to AG, staff spoke. By the following afternoon, in Rhode Island, we had a complaint and a TRO motion on file. I gotta tell you, that is extraordinary work by the staffs. I mean, we're talking about over 100 pages worth of really substantial legal work. Constitutional legal work that has to get done. They had the benefit of having California themed, so they had 3 extra hours, that helps. So that was that case, we got an injunction there. Other cases that have involved public health funding, so there was $11 billion in public health funding for pandemic planning, $31 million in Rhode Island that the president took back, again, already obligated. The president just eliminated it. We fought that here and won that case. We brought the case for dismantling DHS. Again, I mentioned that earlier. That was really just, and that's only going to get worse if we don't stop it. And we're still waiting, right, Keith, for a preliminary injunction on that one, although we're confident we'll get one. Who has that?
Judge Dubose hearing on Tuesday.
Judge Dubose has that. There's a hearing on Tuesday. Excellent. See how he has all this thing to do? You should be up here, Keith. Excellent. So there's that one. You know, I love the museums, libraries, labor. We call it the three agency case and minority business case for lots of reasons. All small agencies that could be overlooked, frankly, dismantled by the administration. We really rely on them in all kinds of ways. But I grew up in a library, like many kids do. I mean, I didn't travel much as a child. I mean, I barely came to Providence. So I learned about the world through a library, through a book. I mean, through my imagination is aided by what I read. And so I really feel good about that one. We won that one. So those were the big four. And then the last week, and then we did, in a similar vein, we sued about NIH grants in Massachusetts. Massachusetts really wanted that case. We could have done it here because it really, I think, it really could have been brought into our OMB case, but because of the amount of research that goes on in Massachusetts wanted to bring that case. And then we have the two cases that we filed, I think it was last week, but I have to tell you, the weeks do kind of merge. Those involved the administration putting conditions on federal funding in two basic areas: Department of Transportation funding, federal highway funding. So think Washington Bridge, think bridge and other infrastructure projects where, federal government funds 80% of that work, typically 75 to 80%, that as a condition of getting that funding, you have to certify that you are cooperating with ICE, Homeland Security, in their immigration. So what does that look like? Well, here's what that, as a practical matter, looks like. I know from my time as U.S. Attorney how many ICE agents are in the state of Rhode Island. There are 8 to 10. I think now there's 8. When I was U.S. Attorney, there was less than 10. I feel for every person in Rhode Island, and we can talk more about that if you like, that gets caught up in the administration's immigration efforts, particularly the civil immigration efforts. Look, if you're, I don't care whether you're a green card holder, or you're unlawfully, or you're a citizen. If you're committing a violent crime, well, we're going to prosecute you equally. That doesn't change anything. But the civil enforcement efforts is really what we're talking about. People are just here, they're working, they've got a driver's privilege card. They're our neighbors, they're our friends. They work with us or for us. I have no interest in participating in that. And I think, I'd like to think that the governor doesn't either. I mean, we don't agree on really much of anything, but I hope we agree on that at least. And I think we do. And so the stakes of that case are really high, right? We get a bridge. If we win, right? If we lose that case, it's either we get the bridge or our state troopers are immigration officers and Providence police are immigration officers. Nobody wants that. That's the only way the president can do en masse what he's trying to do, okay? And so the stakes in that case are really high. If we win that, we're out from under that. If we lose it, that's a very stark choice for us as Rhode Islanders. And that's not where we want to be. So the stakes in that case could be higher. And I think it's easy to miss that. I mean, again, when we announced those cases, I felt like the folks that are supposed to communicate with all of us, the media, or most of the media, did not really get it. I mean, I have to give the Current credit. I think the Current does a really good job. I really do. I don't know if there's any Current people here or fans of them, but I am, and I think they're great. And the Globe does a decent job. But, it's, as I said to my team, look, we're prosecuting the fat test case in North Kingstown, but a little less fat and a little more substance, And it's an important case, no question, for those victims. But writ large, the cases that we brought are really important, as I'm sure you all understand.
So, as a brown guy with tattoos who's involved in activism work, I thank you for bringing those cases. I think about, my neighbors, right, who I don't know their citizenship status, and I don't really care, right? None of us should care about that. We are all out here just trying to do our best, trying to make a living, and trying to make the world a better place. And I think you are spot on, AG Neronha, about how that has been covered in the media, that it's much easier for them to get the clicks to say ICE was in Providence last week, ICE was, in wherever last week, and everybody should be really scared, and there's this 4-week-old baby who's going to be deported, and not report on the fact that you and your colleagues are taking action specifically against that to ensure that as we win that case, which I'm hopeful you're confident that we're going to win, because I'm confident we're going to win, that we can sort of rebuff some of those things and some of that fear-mongering that truly does have a day-to-day impact on the psyche of people that are here, on the psyche of people that couldn't make it today. I'll be honest with you, I walk out of my house and my head is on a swivel. I am a U.S.-born citizen, I am a first-generation American. I am one of those people that would be impacted by the birthright citizenship type ruling, right? Yeah. So I think in that way, when we think on a large scale, these lawsuits are incredibly important to the fabric of just maintaining a just society as it stands right now, which is crumbling, I think, and I think we would agree with that as the days go by. So we thank you in your office for that. Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you here for another a climate or environment.
Yes, let me get one more climate one in here. So New York and Vermont have directed oil and gas companies to pay for the impacts of their emissions in so-called climate superfund or make polluter pay bills. And a similar bill, Senate 326 or H5424, was introduced this year in Rhode Island. So Timmons Roberts wanted to know if oil and gas companies are challenging the lawsuits in Vermont and New York. How do you feel? How do you see that issue? Would your office be willing to go head-to-head with big oil in court on some of these emissions lawsuits? And I know there's been some attempts from the administration to kind of grant them immunity. It's been done with gun manufacturers, I think, for mass shootings. So if you could respond to that.
So we would definitely be engaged there. And we already are in litigation with big oil and gas. Unfortunately, the case takes so long that I'll be gone by the time it comes to a head. But we've been in litigation with them since I've been in office in a public nuisance case, which is, as the professor knows. And the idea there is that they've got to pay for their lying. It's about lying. With the oil companies, it's about lying. I mean, they lied to the American public for a generation or more. And the theory of that case is that they need to pay for that lie through resiliency. And so whether it's in that case or if such a law were to be passed by the General Assembly here, then we would certainly defend it and the state should the administration take it on or the big oil take it on. That is what we're doing with respect to the gun industry, by defending a high-capacity magazine ban successfully so far. So all of when the General Assembly passes those gun safety laws, it's my office that's defending them. The same people that are taking on Trump are doing that work as well, including Keith. You were on that. Were you on the high-capacity magazine case?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, there's Keith again. So, and Sarah Rice, who I haven't mentioned, is terrific. We're in that game already, and we'll continue to stay there.
So I think Keith will actually be signing autographs in the back when this is all done. So please make sure you have your Sharpies ready for Keith. Keith has been a superstar, as has your entire staff. So let's talk about lying a little bit, because it seems as if that is sort of the name of the game for the current administration. And we've talked a little bit about how we would be in the full-blown constitutional crisis if, when the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling, it is just ignored, right? And then you have people like Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller going on TV lying to the American people over and over and over again. In what ways do you think the courts can take action against that? Or in a similar vein, why haven't the courts taken action when there are certain things that are either being ignored or it's just kind of being sent back and forth? In what ways can the courts take action to get the point across?
Yeah, so it's a great look into what's going on and where we're headed. So for me, it's highly unusual to ignore a court order. As I've alluded to earlier, whether you're talking about a Supreme Court order like Bush v. Gore or Dobbs or Bruen, we just don't ignore Bruen when it changes the way our gun laws are interpreted. You figure out what you have to do and what you don't, but When you come to what you have to do, then you do it. And the same is true, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I mean, the notion of ignoring with Judge Torres or Judge Lisi or Judge Lagur or Judge Smith, they were the judges at the time, was, it's just inconceivable. If he told you to do something, you did it. So, and I mentioned earlier about how in our cases we've seen this passive aggressiveness. It isn't outright F you. It's sort of like, we'll have to wait and see, or we'll get back to you, or we're trying, but the memo didn't get to everybody. That's kind of been the reaction. And so when that's happened, why not, get in your car, even if you're on a side street, hit the accelerator and go to 100 miles an hour and move for contempt, which is what, frankly, all of my instincts would tell me to do. What my staff has counseled, and the staffs around the country have counseled their issues, is these cases are going to be appealed. Finding of contempt is going to be appealed. An injunction is going to be appealed because it's a stay. They all get appealed. We're winning those too. But when they are appealed, we want to be in the best possible position. So their notion is file a motion to enforce, not a motion for contempt. And so that's why you see these, the gentleman here asked about the fellow from El Salvador. Why is it taking so long? Why isn't it just, President Trump, you're in contempt. We're going to put you downstairs in the jailhouse for 60 days. Sounds appealing, right? So yeah, there you go. So what's the answer? The answer is the courts are trying to avoid the constitutional crisis because nobody really knows how that turns out while still getting there. And so I think the notion is that when it gets to these circuit courts, not every circuit's like the first, frankly. The fifth is very different from the first. The fourth is different from the first. The second is different from the first. So when we get to the Supreme Court, if it gets to the point where the head of the Secretary of State maybe is held in contempt, I doubt it gets to Trump, but Rubio is held in contempt for the Secretary of State not doing enough to facilitate the return of that person who got swept up in that situation, which is, it's disgraceful, obviously. We want the court to be in a place where there's only one answer, and that is contempt, right? That the lower court couldn't have tried to do more to try to bring the administration to where it needs to be. So that's why I believe you're seeing it play out. But I will tell you, it's plus 100 days, that I know, but whether it's 120 days or 150, it feels like 100 years for all of us, right? But we're not that far into it yet. That's not to minimize every day that he spends in El Salvador. But the reality is that the court system is moving fairly quickly for a system that does not move quickly very often.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we sort of tell everyone who says, what can I do? One of the things that we say is, well, here, and you alluded to this earlier, we are a fairly solidly blue state. I think folks who show up to something like this are pretty level-headed and sort of equal mind about a lot of these issues. But one of the things we tell folks is, hey, you got to call your friends who live in Alabama and Mississippi, or in red districts where they have a MAGA or Republican congressperson, and have them call those people to help decisions get made. And so the question also goes to you about the Republican attorneys general.
Yeah.
And how are the Democratic attorneys general kind of recruiting them to say, hey, you see what's going on. This is clearly against the law, and you've sworn an oath. At what point do we get some of those folks crossing the picket line, just like we're asking regular folks to do that as well?
Yeah. I think only if their constituencies professional. And I'll get to how I think that could happen. I think there is hope for that happening. And then I think we should talk a little bit about even in blue states, how how do we make sure that we are putting our best foot forward when it comes to official resistance, shall we say? So make sure I come back to that if I don't.
That's the next question.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
okay,
All right,
yeah.
good. So we'll leave that for the next part. So I don't spend a lot of time with my Republican colleagues, and that sounds bad, but I did go on a trip with them last year to Normandy, and I went for two reasons. Number one, every Memorial Day I spend a lot of time with veterans. My dad's a veteran of Korea, as I mentioned. And that's an area where, we give a lot of speeches over the course of the year, but those are the ones I really believe, those aren't ones that the staff prepares for you. Frankly, the staff doesn't prepare any of mine. But those aren't ones you can mail in. But I saw Normandy once with my children and my wife, but it was really fast. I wanted to go back. And so it was also an opportunity to do a number of other things, meet with some members of law enforcement from other areas. This was last summer. But it was also a chance to be with my Republican AGs. Where are their heads? I mean, remember, this is the same group, 18 of them. Filed a lawsuit to overturn the election. I mean, they think the election was stolen. So, you're not starting at the best place with them. And my wife went on the trip, and her thing was like, who's this Ken Paxton guy? And is he really as evil as he seems to be? Because, my wife feels very strongly about reproductive rights, freedoms, and choice. I don't think that Ken Paxton acknowledged me or my wife one time in the entire trip. Even though we were in an elevator room. And I know who he is, so I'm assuming he knows who I am. Now, granted, Texas is a big state and we're a little one. But we still, don't try to fool with us. So it's hard. They're hard. They're hard to reach. I talked to William Tong, who's a terrific AG from Connecticut, who is, I think, the vice chair of the National Association, which includes all of us. It's just hard. I mean, they're just hard to reach. So I don't hold out a lot of hope of defections to the cause. So I think the one that's easiest to reach is New Hampshire. It's John Formello. I've known John, he's a good guy, good man. He doesn't join any of our lawsuits. Why does that matter? This goes to the nationwide injunction issue. People think, oh my God, the AGs will be devastated if we don't get if national injunctions are thrown out. And in a sense we will, because in birthright citizenship, it makes no sense to do anything else. But in all of our cases that we filed, it's the rare case, and it's not in any of the Rhode Island cases, that we filed for a nationwide injunction. Why? Because we believe, like our Republican counterparts, that elections have consequences. And so where our money gets turned back on, their money doesn't. So in New Hampshire, all of that public health money that we've been talking about and all the other money is still turned off. And so John Formello is getting a lot of pushback from people in New Hampshire. Dartmouth, UNH, they want their research funding turned back on. URI, you're getting it, okay? So, that's how I think they'll come around, that in their states, they're not getting, Florida, they're not getting the NIH funding that we're getting here. And so as their constituencies put pressure on their leaders, and look, some red states may be rich enough, other states may not care enough, but some will, and I think that's how it'll turn. I really do.
So a lot of it comes back to the idea that if it doesn't affect them directly, they don't really care until it does.
Correct.
Yeah, fair enough.
They're hard to reach on an intellectual. I'm not saying they're stupid. They're hard to reach on an intellectual.
You're not saying that?
No. But that's what makes them candidly kind of frightening, right? That they believe in MAGA, but they're smart, and that's. It's really hard. And look, I made attempts. Hey, Alan, how you doing? Hey, Tim, how you doing? And you sort of get the one word shut down answers. It was a strange trip. It really was.
So we are not alone, is what he's saying. Right? We get the same response from the same kind of regular people, right? And it seems to be the same thing.
It is, yeah. I mean, look, there are no AGs of color in that group.
Yeah.
And there were
shocking.
there were a number of AGs of color in our group, and some wonderful ones. Kwame Raoul in Illinois, Andrea Campbell in Massachusetts, Nick Brown out in now in Washington State, Andrew Brown in Maryland. I mean, there's a number. I mean, so many that I can't tick them off. But so it's not like there's only one or two. But we found ourselves, and they found themselves, sort of effectively self-selecting, sort of where you sat at the dinners. It was very strange. It was very strange.
Is there a video of these dinners and these interactions? Hey, like, that would be outstanding. That's a better reality show than what Kristi Nova's planning.
It is. Look, we've gotten some heat. CNN has done some reporting as, why are we going on these trips? Because taxpayers aren't paying and I'm not paying. Oh, sorry, yeah. So the CNN has followed some of these trips and sort of criticized the AGs for doing them, and I understand their perspective. But it is important to kind of see what you're dealing with. And frankly, it is important for us as Democrats to get in a room together from time to time. It's really important because we have disputes. I think the bigger the state, the bigger the ego, and you can tell I probably have a pretty good sized one myself, but so imagine what California's like. We're all wonderful. But look, Washington State wanted to file birthright citizenship. So did Massachusetts. That's why we have 2 birthright citizenship cases, and that's all fine until only one person can argue before the Supreme Court. And then we got to vote. Who's going to, we shouldn't get there, but we do. We figured it out. We ended up being New Jersey, who was part of the mass team, but, we shouldn't be operating that way. There are those little bumps for it.
Little drama. We'll wait for the Real Housewives of Rhode Island to get some of that content. So we'll be wrapping up. Carrie and Indivisible are nonprofits, and there's been a lot of fear about the attacks on nonprofits taking away our status, and now I think that bill to kind of whichever nonprofits they don't like could be deemed, kind of supporting terrorism that's been put into the budget. So any remarks on that, and then what can nonprofits do, and what can elected officials here in our state do to safeguard our rights and resources?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, so I'll try to tick them off really quickly in the interest of time. So, give me the first part of it again.
Nonprofits.
Yeah, nonprofits. So we try to get all of the nonprofits into our big OMB case. We asked Judge McConnell. So we're suing on behalf of the state. We're suing on behalf of nonprofits who get money through the state, so it flows from the federal government through the state. We tried to get all other nonprofits into our case. Couldn't do it. Judge McConnell was a bridge too far for him. He did not go there. And that's why you saw the environmental case get filed shortly thereafter, because we couldn't pull him in. Certainly, to the extent that there are, that nonprofits are targeted for what they do, at a minimum, we file an amicus brief on their behalf, as we've done in other cases where we can't directly act if we needed to. In terms of, and ask me again if I missed something, but talking about what can we do here, what can officialdom do? Well, look, our congressional delegation is speaking out. I give them credit, It took, in some instances, some encouragement to do that, and I think this group is a big part of that. But they're sidelined. I mean, they're in the minority and they're sidelined, and I understand how powerless they effectively are. We, on the other hand, can actually go do something, which, frankly feels really good when you get up in the morning. I think our state officials, we haven't heard a lot from them. I mean, I think the governor, frankly, has been far too quiet on this issue. I think he can negotiate with Trump. That if you make an appeal based on what I don't know, that or if you pledge fealty or something, that you'll get what you want. I don't think you can act that way with this guy. He's like the Cookie Monster. He's more than just wants cookies, but he wants not 1, but 2, 3, 4, 5. He will keep eating until we're gone. And so you can't negotiate with a guy like Donald Trump. You have to fight him, and that's what we're doing. I will say that what has been very disappointing here, I want to give a shout out to somebody who has helped, Speaker Sicarci, and the late President Ruggiero, by giving us in the office the resources we have needed to do this fight. We got 10, somebody keeps telling me 15, I feel like it was 10. If it was 15, it was 15. New positions 2 years ago. I got in a big fight with the governor over this. He wouldn't do it because he doesn't like me, because I've investigated his administration now 3 times. Well, that's my job. It's not personal, it's my job. But he did not give us those lawyers. The speaker did, to his credit. Without those lawyers, they're the same ones that are doing this work today. They're the same ones that are going to deliver, we're going to have an announcement this week, $10 million to help for healthcare for children in Providence, okay? I could have done that without the speaker, but the governor has not supported those efforts. I asked for 5 more people this time around. By the way, we're paying for those people out of the, in other words, I just need the position. I don't need the money. The money I have from a legal fees fund from all the opioids work we did. So it's the best deal for the taxpayers. You got 15 more lawyers that are being paid for by the opioid companies. That's a pretty good deal. The governor won't go there because it's Peter Neronha who's asking. So I find that incredibly disappointing. And so when people ask me, what can you do? You could write him and tell him, put your distaste for Neronha aside. He doesn't care. But do the right thing for Rhode Islanders in the country and give him the resources he needs, we need, to fight Trump. Because we're the only ones in a position to fight him. And if you're not in the fight, you're effectively assisting him. And that's where I really fault the government.
Absolutely. So again, neutrality favors the oppressor, right? So, I know you are big on standing up to bullies, and we appreciate everything that you're doing, you and your office and the other Democratic AGs around the country. So as a former prosecutor and current Attorney General, I want to give you the chance to give the closing argument as you finish prosecuting the case here for the people. And please, just deliver that closing argument to the crowd.
Sure. So when I wrote my first annual report, I don't expect that not a person in this room has read, even though we try to punch it up, one of the biggest wastes of print ink we've ever done. But I write a message, and the first line in that message, and I've used it elsewhere, but officially I've used the same line, and I believe it. It's the fight that matters. It's the fight that matters. Of course, you want to win, and today the stakes for winning or not winning are as high as they've ever been in our country, ever. But back then, it mattered in terms of healthcare and environmental enforcement that wasn't getting done. Like, if we had to take the city of Woonsocket to court to stop them from polluting the Blackstone, then we were going to do it. And it didn't matter if we had to pull DEM kicking and screaming into the room to do it with us. We were going to figure out how to do it. It's the fight that matters. And it was true then, and it's true now. And what we need is a collective willingness to fight. Law firms that capitulate aren't fighting, okay? And so, I'm not afraid of losing cases. I've never been afraid of losing them. I always felt like every case that I tried, it was the right thing to do. Sometimes I didn't get a conviction. That was okay, that's how the system worked. I brought corruption cases, won most of them, lost one. I didn't like losing it. I didn't like that outcome at all. But I accepted it. But what mattered was the fight. If you're going to bribe the mayor of North Providence, and the councilors go to jail, and the bag man goes to jail, well then, goddamn it, the developer deserves to go to jail too. I don't care how rich he is. Right? So that was a righteous fight. So it's the fight that matters. And what matters today is fighting Donald Trump on every issue. Rob Bonta, my colleague in California, I think put it best. He said, we are never going to say we're not in the fight because we don't have the people. I don't care whether or not the governor gives me those 5 people. We've got 1/3 of the cases in Rhode Island with the people I've got. 1/3 of the total are right here. So I don't care whether he gives them to me or not, we're going to fight. We're going to fight, we're going to figure it out. And it's because my folks care enough about you and the country that if it takes working all weekend and through the night, they're going to do it. And if the country has that same energy and approach and fight, we will outlive collectively as a country and as a people Donald Trump. As my old German professor, who always was sincere, I don't know if if you remember Mr. Gardner, who taught German at NK. He used to say, I hope not about me, that somebody was a wart on the rear end of progress. And I believe that when my children are my age, 40 years from now, Donald Trump will have been a wart on the rear end of progress.